Ready? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our town hall meeting. I'd like to thank you all for attending. I think when you have debates, a lot of people show up and to see the fireworks. When you have a town hall meeting to just learn about the candidates, not as many people generally show up. So I compliment all of you for being here tonight and learning about these two candidates. Baron Browning is unable to attend tonight, so we will have Erin and Max only. I'm the facilitator. My name is Mike Warren, and I will help facilitate the meeting, hopefully in a very orderly way. No fighting, no cussing, okay? Same with you guys. There are cards on everybody's table, and there's a jar over there. If you'd like to have a question answered by either candidate, write their name on the top or somewhere in there so we know who it's addressed to. And one question per card. You can fill out as many cards as you like, but make it easy on those that are going through the cards because they will group similar questions. So if there's 3 or 4 cards that ask basically the same question, they'll combine those, they'll get it to me, and I'll be able to ask either of the candidates. The timing for the candidates, just remember the number 3. You have 3 minutes to give your opening address, talk about who you are, why in the world you would do this. You'll have 3 minutes at the very end to close, and you'll have 3 minutes per question. Cheryl McKinley is right there, and she will hold up a flag when you have 30 seconds left.
This is a Ukrainian flag.
Ukrainian
I
flag.
noticed that.
Yeah.
And then when you're out of time, the American flag goes up. I can have 3 minutes. You're the official timer, by the way. You didn't wear your uniform, but that's okay.
That was the first time. Keep your uniform. Nobody told me.
I like that you're blue and white striped.
Yeah.
It feels a little like an umpire.
Oh,
a
no,
little bit.
that's exactly what I was going for. Yeah.
Help yourself to water and cookies over there. Cookies are pretty good. Store-bought, though.
Yeah.
I complained the first when I came in. They're not homemade. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started. And I'll ask the ladies first. I'll ask Erin Resner, who's running for Board of Supervisor, District 1, to introduce herself and talk a little bit about herself, and then we'll go to Max. So, you're up, Erin.
Perfect. Are there any other rules that you would like me to follow? Sit up, stand, any other sort of? I suppose I should sit up, but stand, sit down.
Is it okay? I'll ask both of you. Is it okay if I addressed you by your first name?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then on the questions, do you both want to stand or sit?
I'll stand. I think
Both
that
of
might
you?
make it easier.
It doesn't matter.
And
just
would you
want
like the
attention.
audience to stand when they're hearing the
Oh.
question being answered? No other rules. Have a good time.
Perfect. First, I would like to thank everybody for coming. I really, really appreciate your desire to learn about candidates and to be involved in the election process and to ask us some questions. I will give a little bit of background about myself because I think that there's probably a good portion of this room who I have not met before. My name is Erin Resner. I am a local mom and wife. We have 4 children. My husband and I have been here and own Dutch Bros Coffee here in town for the last 18 years or so. I am a former mayor of Redding and a current member of the Redding City Council. I've been serving on the Redding City Council for since 2018. So in December, I will finish my first term in any sort of elected office. Originally, I ran for city council because my husband and I had served on a handful of different boards and nonprofits, and we have attempted to be as generous as possible with our business and to support our community. And I felt like that there was only a period of time that you could sit on the sidelines for so long before you know that you have the skill set necessary to help and to offer help and assistance, and which is why I did that in 2018. And for the last year or two, I have been watching the county, and in my experience and the things that I have learned at City Council and being a business owner, as well as my time served as the president of the Northern Sac Valley Division for the League of California Cities, what I have learned brainstorming and collaborating with people in our community, but also other rural cities throughout the state, I know that I have the experience and the skills necessary to help tackle some of our serious challenges. Some of those, in my opinion, which I think are probably the same as you guys, are in terms of public safety, homelessness, mental health, jail space. I think that those are things that really, really matter to me, and I think that they're really important to the community. And I know that I have the skills necessary to execute and help our county with excellence. Thank you.
Okay,
You
Max.
get to wave the flag.
Oh, gosh, sorry.
You have 30 seconds left.
Max Steiner is running for District 1 Congressman, United States Congressman, and he has 3 minutes to talk about himself.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. So first, I'd like to echo Erin and thanking you guys for coming out. I wish that I could promise a debate with my opponent. He's so far demurred. So, but it's good to see voters, right? I don't know. I've seen a lot of you guys before. Some of you are new faces. So this is me. I will be on your ballot. It's probably already at your house. So we'll kind of structure this. Who am I, right? And like, what do I want to do in Washington? So part one, I live in Chico with my wife. I was born in Sacramento. My brother lives here in Redding. He lost his house in the car fire. You'll find out about how that affects forestry later. When I graduated high school, I joined the Army. I did 4 years on active duty as an infantryman. I did 2 years in Iraq, kicking down doors, doing that. Not like infantry qualifies you for Congress. They're very different jobs. But, it's this idea of service, right? I didn't join the Army to make money. I made $25,000 the year I was in Iraq. Then I made sergeant, got out, joined the reserves. So I've been in the reserves for 13 years. I think service is a great part of being an American, and I want to continue serving you in politics. After I got out of the Army, I used my GI Bill. I went to Berkeley. Bit of a culture shock going from the Army to Berkeley. That's all right. Then I run as a Democrat in Shasta, also culture shock. But I got out of that. I met my wife there, got out, joined the Foreign Service. So I was a diplomat. I was an ag officer in Honduras, basically helping U.S. exporters there. I did visa work in Tijuana and helping out Americans that were encountered the Mexican legal system, which in Tijuana is a lot. The Second Amendment does not apply in Mexico, guys. It's a different country. And then I was a peacekeeper in Egypt, so I basically implemented the Camp David Accords. I came back. I started working at RAND. My wife had a job in tech. She didn't want to be a trailing spouse, so we moved to Chico during the pandemic. So there's two major things that I want to accomplish locally in Congress, and that's forestry and water. We need to change the way that we manage forests. We've kind of seen a pendulum swing from clear cutting in the early 80s to no cutting. We need to bring it back to balance, right? And this idea that we can somehow manage the forest through environmental regulations that strangle the timber industry has not worked. We can look at the outcome. We lost 35% of North State forest to fire. It's a failure, right? So we need to reevaluate and reassess and move on. And that's going to mean less regulation. It's going to mean more timber, and it's going to mean more trees getting cut down. The second thing is dams, right? So water is a huge issue. The only influence that the federal government has on water is increasing supply, and that means building water storage. I support Sites Reservoir. I support raising the Shasta Dam, or at least studying it. These are contentious issues, and they're not free. It's very expensive. All the cheap, easy dams were built 40 years ago, but it's something that we need to look at with climate change. And then I guess that's my 3 minutes. So those are my big two policies, and kind of like who I am as a person, and hopefully I will win you over in the next 40 minutes and convince you to check my name on your ballot.
Thank you, Max.
30 seconds left.
Oh, I had 3 minutes. That's all right.
5 seconds. You're done.
They're going to add up their time that they didn't use, and
There you go. So Erin
and
gets
they'll
30
do
seconds.
something at the end.
Extra there.
Okay,
We're gonna
so
attempt to be concise. That's my.
we have at least one question. Jane Work is coming up,
Oh,
and
there's more.
there's more.
Certain of.
What would you position be on the, Erin, the first one's for you. If you're elected, what would your position be on the county's stand on gay pride?
You mean that the county has, I would probably say that I think that it's really important that every single person in our community feels welcome and safe and those sort of things. I think that it's really important as an elected official that you are willing to sit at the table and to represent every single section of your community. I often take a lot of heat for being outspoken. My husband and I attend church at the Stirring in Redding, and I often take a lot of heat for being connected to any sort of local church or religious organization. And I feel the same way about gay pride, or as I do about religious discrimination or racial discrimination or any of those sort of things. So you have probably in a city council meeting you have probably seen me be defensive of others who were making discriminatory comments about any section of our population, because I truly believe that as an elected official that it is your job to listen and to represent every single section of that community and to do it with respect.
Thank you. Okay, next one's for Max. Can you give us some examples of what you would have done that Mr. LaMalfa has not done?
Yeah, the big one is passing good bills, right? So I don't want to turn overly negative because this is about the town hall format. The big thing is being able to engage productively with Sacramento on forestry and water policies. Part of being a politician, from a conservative area of the state, and I'm a pretty moderate conservative Democrat, is that if you're pushing kind of these policies like building dams or cutting down trees that aren't from the environmental faction of the Democratic Party, you're going to get a lot of pushback in Sacramento, because Sacramento is not the North State, right? It's far more liberal. And you need to be able to build bridges with that voting constituency, right? Like whatever federal policy you do in the North State, whatever money you're bringing in, you need to get buy-in from Sacramento, because they're going to be implementing at least part of the project. You can look at sites. Sites is 75% state, 25% federal. And someone like Doug, who is incapable of building those kinds of relationships, you can't go down to Sacramento and compromise or use a language that the Democrats in Sacramento understand. You can't go to Sacramento to pick a fight. And I think that what I would bring to the North State is someone who can work with all the different factions, right? Like that's the glory of being a moderate, is you get criticized by everyone and you can work with everyone because you're not that far apart. And Sacramento is way to the left on where we need to be in the North State, and LaMalfa is way to the right. And we need to have someone that can kind of work these projects through and get trees cut down and restart our timber industry and reduce fire risk. And on the dam side, just get these projects built. So that's my answer there, right? Being able to work a lot more productively with state level officials.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question for Erin. What will you do to keep criminals in prison instead in and out on the same day? That's for you, Erin.
As I stated in the beginning, I think that jail space is something that is on the forefront of everyone's mind. And not to steal a line from you, but I really think that it is important, and something that I have advocated for, is that there has to be work. You have to be willing to work with those in Sacramento, because, and that means that somebody has to be able to take your call or be willing to take your call so that you can attempt to share what it looks like in Shasta County, or advocate for what it looks like in Shasta County, or to clue in those 60% plus Democrats who run the legislature. This, not this year, but the year before, I sat on the Public Safety Lobbying Committee for the League of California Cities so that we could lobby Sacramento on what it looks like when we are hiring law enforcement and some of the restrictions that they're wanting to put in place, things like you need to be over the age of 25 or you need to have a degree in order to go to be hired for law enforcement. Making sure that we're explaining to Sacramento the bills in which that they're attempting to pass and how it is that that translates to the rest of rural California, because it's not just us. There are a lot of other rural counties who have the same similar struggle. We are not San Francisco, we are not LA, we are not San Diego, we are not some of these larger cities, and what works there isn't going to work in the rest of the state. But when Sacramento has a supermajority, they are able to pass whatever legislature they want. So it's really important that you have somebody in a seat who can advocate for you and who has enough relational equity to be able to say, hey, I know that this is really what you think, but this is what that looks like for the rest of the state. So I think that that's really important. I also think that it's really important to collaborate with the DA, to collaborate with the sheriff, and to collaborate with our other law enforcement partners. I think that it also is worth mentioning at this point in time that all law enforcement agencies, the sheriff, retirement sheriff, I have the endorsement of past Sheriff Jim Pope. I have the endorsement of our current sheriff, Michael Johnson, of RPOA, who is RPD's Peace Officer Association, as well as the Sheriff Deputies Association. And I think that that's because I've done a very good job of asking them and supporting them on the tactics in which that they think will work, and making sure that they have the resources so they can go out and be proactive rather than reactive.
Good, thank you. Max, your turn. Your view on pro-choice and Roe versus Wade, and your view on fracking, especially in the North State.
I thought we were supposed to have one question per card.
Yeah, I was like,
No, that's all right.
Oh, no, it's the same
So-
card. Oh, that's
Same
right,
card.
yeah, this is true.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna pick one. The one I want more. No, I'm just kidding. I'll answer both. So first, Roe v. Wade. So I supported Roe v. Wade. You know, I think we can all kind of agree to disagree in how it was implemented by courts. I don't like activist judges. I think this was a problem for the legislature. The legislature dodged that in 1973. You know, they just kind of punted it to the court, and now it's come back. And we don't want policy being decided by the court. But after 50 years, courts should be very hesitant about overturning precedent. So I support Roe v. Wade. I think viability was a good line. You know, I'm a Catholic. I think there's a lot of Democrats who are like, oh, it's forced birth, and that's wrong. There's a lot of people, I'm sure in this room included, you know, have sincere religious beliefs about abortion, think that it's murder, and I respect that, and I kind of share that belief, you know, personally. But render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render to God what is God. We live in a secular country. We decided that viability was the line. Opinion polls consistently support that, and I think that we as a government should respect basically public opinion on a matter such as this, right? We are Americans. We have the right to, you know, do things that other people disagree with, and I think it makes me very nervous when I think that we're having a religious policy be enacted as law, even as, you know, a Catholic. So obviously I've just lost some votes there. That's all right. It's a very contentious issue, and that's my answer, right? I'm pro-choice. I'd codify Roe v. Wade into law. The second question, moving on from that, is fracking. Energy security is national security. I understand that no one wants to live next to a fracking well. I understand that especially when you guys are on domestic wells, because obviously fracking through an aquifer really increases the risk of contamination. This is something that we can manage with proper environmental regulations while still maximizing the amount of petroleum that we as a nation produce. And we are in a time of increasing political uncertainty, and that means that every barrel of oil that we produce in this country is a barrel that we can send to Europe and displace Russian oil. It's a barrel that we can send to Japan and displace Iranian and Venezuelan oil. This is important. I know that I don't come across as a typical environmental Democrat, but it's great that we're moving towards a zero carbon, or at least minimizing our carbon footprint. But at this time, we are an energy-based economy, and we're an energy-based West, and every barrel that we produce helps the West resist people that do not share our fundamental values. So we can't save the climate, we can't save the planet if we are dependent on someone like Russia. Oh, sorry, is that 30 seconds
That's
or out?
30 seconds.
Great. So, so that's my stance there, right? Like in general, I support fracking. I think it's something that Jimmy Carter started it. We'll take credit as Democrats for that. And there's a lot of environmental costs, and it needs to be done correctly. But we are kind of like we're the arsenal of democracy, and we're also the gas station of democracy. And that means that there are a lot of people worldwide who are depending on United States oil production. And that is especially true this year with the invasion of Ukraine.
Okay, thanks for taking 2 questions. I apologize. Erin, what do you have against Doug LaMotha to now support Max?
Wow, interesting question.
I just met Max about 5 minutes ago when everybody probably saw us shake hands. That's the first time in which that we have ever, well, we've yet to have a conversation. I said, hi, I'm Erin, nice to meet you. I don't really have an opinion one way or another or anything about, and this is really rude to, and awkward to doing it, but this is not my endorsement of Max. This is an opportunity for me to live out and to walk out the thing in which that I preach, which is collaboration. Because if you are unwilling to come to the table and have a conversation with people who may have differing opinions than yourself, I'm pretty sure that we both like the Second Amendment, and that might be the, so far that's what I know.
Did you not get the teacher endorsement either?
So I think that it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit of a funny question. This is me walking the talk. This is me saying I think it's important for voters to get to hear how we feel about various different topics. And I don't really care as long as it's done in a respectful and welcoming way, which you've all been very kind and really good listeners. And so I'll continue to do that. And that's the thing in which that I will continue to do on the Board of Supervisors. I will continue to have conversations with people who maybe do not agree with me 100% of the time, because I think that it gives us perspective. One of the things I am most proud of for the city council, I've served with 2 separate city councils for 2 years, one and for the last 2 years a different one. One of the things I am most proud of is that we may be lockstep in 5-0. We may have in the same meeting a 3-2 vote in which that we are battling back and forth for what direction it should go, and then the next vote is a 5-0 vote because we all just voted the way that we think that we should in the best interest of our community. And as soon as we leave that dais, we are friendly and we are asking the other person about how their spouse is doing or how their new grandchild is. We may disagree respectfully on the dais, and then we can still be
Sorry. You have 30 seconds.
okay, perfect.
Sorry.
We can still respect each other and have decorum. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the way in which the 2 councils the 2 makeup of the 2 councils that I've served with in the last 4 years have been that even in our disagreements, we have been respectful of each other and we move on and we don't hold that against each other. So nice to meet you. I feel the same as everybody here. I'm interested to hear what it is that you have to say.
Can I answer this one as well? Or just piggyback on it? Second. Nope.
He had 30 seconds left
What do you all say?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Right, so the easy answer is that I'm not voting for Erin, right? I don't live in her district. But this is just, it's a chance to talk to people, right? Like, we invite everyone, we talk to everyone. The Democrats, we hosted a campaign debate in the primary. We invited Doug, he didn't show up, and a Republican showed up, an independent showed up, and I showed up, right? And we packed the Union Hall on Cypress, or on Willow, I'm sorry. And this is just there's this weird sense in America right now that not only do I not want to hear the other side, but I don't want to hear, I don't want to have anyone on my side hearing the other side. And I think that's really divisive. Listen, we are a country in which we have a democracy, in which we will disagree, and we have a system by which we will resolve those disagreements. And that is an election, right? We don't need to have elections if everyone agrees with each other. If we all agree with each other, we'd pick one guy and he'd implement it, right? So I wanted to have this event because I thought that people would like to hear different levels of politicians talk about similar problems, and we'd all get a mix of people in here, and some of them would leave planning to vote for Erin, and some would plan leaving voting for Cry, and some would vote for me, and a lot would vote for Lamalfa, because you know what, it's Shasta County. Honestly, that's the statistics. So I'm here because I want to answer your questions. Erin is here because she wants to answer your questions, and that's it. Right, and Amarjeet is here because he's running for city council, and he just wants to meet everyone he can, right? So, yeah, so that's kind of like the answer there, is that we're supposed to have these kinds of events where we mix ideas. That's what makes our democracy strong, and the idea that somehow we shouldn't even share a conversation or share a stage, I think is really hostile to the founding principles of this republic. So that's my answer there.
Okay, I forgot to say, this is my first time doing this. So I'm glad you helped me out on that one and allowed Max to go ahead and piggyback.
We had a
on the
vote,
question.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, Erin, this one's for you. What is needed to bring stability to county government leadership, parentheses department heads, and meet staffing needs, especially correctional officers?
Culture. I believe that one of the things that is really, and maybe culture can also translate a little bit to morale and what that looks like at the county level. We have hundreds of vacancies. And I hear pretty frequently that there are a lot of county employees who are sort of holding their breath to decide what it is that they want to do with their future based on how November goes. It is very difficult to attract a qualified individual for a qualified candidate for any position that we are attempting to hire for when they see division, when they see nastiness, when they're potentially thinking that an error that they make will be publicly displayed or that they will be villainized. That's really hard to hire. And this is not something necessarily new to Shasta County. We are not our best advocates online. One of the things that we often talk about, that the EDC will talk about, the Economic Development Corporation will often talk about when they're attempting to bring people here, or when Mercy and Dignity are attempting to bring people to Shasta County, that trailing spouse Googles Shasta County and starts looking at how we trash and how we badmouth either each other or how we are not lifting up. This is an incredible place to live. I travel all over the country in an RV every summer with my children for 4 weeks. I have 4 of them, so that's a lot. A lot of traveling. It is not a vacation. It is definitely an experience with my kids all over the country. And every single time we come back here, I'm so thankful to live here because we have incredible people, we have incredible resources, and honestly, this is this jewel that most people don't know about. So in my opinion, if we can advertise ourselves better and we can do a better job of having leaders who are respectful and not divisive, that culture trickles down. And I mentioned earlier that my husband and I own Dutch Roast Coffee here in town, and one of the things that our staff will tell you is most important is culture. It is really important. Are we customer focused? And are we thankful for the people who are coming in? And I think that those changes come from a leadership position all the way down. I think that if you want to change what things look like in planning and permitting and what those structures look like, or you want to change things, I know that Sheriff Johnson has made some real serious strides in terms of morale. I know that his people support him and are thankful. However, he needs a board who will back his ideas, back the ideas of his deputies, and who will tell them that we will get you the things you need to do a good job. I think that every department head needs to have that. But we also need to have in place systems and standards that are what I would call setting SMART goals. So those are measurable goals, and we're putting it in, we're evaluating what are the systems that we're using, what programs are we using, are they evidence-based programs, and evaluating those with actual measurable outcomes. So I'll go back to, I think that culture is really important, and I think that leadership is really important.
Okay. Max, what are ways the federal, state, and local governments can improve working together to combat climate change and wildfires especially?
Yeah, so the big answer on wildfires is that we need to have a change in forest management. Kind of talked about that earlier. And then secondarily, we need to have a change in the way that we attack fires. So I'll talk about that second one first because it's a little easier. You know, we need to have a way that we need to go back to aggressive initial attack, right? This idea of managed fire, this idea of let it burn, that may have worked 20 years ago, or it may have been low risk 20 years ago. It does not work now, right? Managed fire is out for the foreseeable future. Prescribed fire under very controlled conditions is fine, but we need to understand that, you know, with climate change, letting any fire in a forest, when it's hot, when it's windy, it's too much risk. And we really need to impress on federal fire management agencies, and to some extent CAL FIRE as much as you can from Congress, that we want to return to the policies of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which is aggressive initial attack, this out by 10 mentality, the idea that you're going to attack a fire at night as soon as you detect a fire, you're going to be very aggressive, and you're going to put that fire out. The second thing, how can we work together on forest management policies? So this is kind of like, hey, we want to restart the timber industry, right? So there's going to be some federal components of that, which is guaranteeing a certain amount of throughput for a mill, right? You want to start a mill, you need to be guaranteed that you'll have some trees to process, which means you need to guarantee some amount of timber. And that's a federal problem because most of the timber is federal. But you also need to have state policies to allow that mill to operate. You need to have environmental policies that allow that mill to start up. You need to have state policies that generate employment and housing for those individuals that'll work at that mill. You know, I talk to a lot of basically forest professionals throughout the district. There is a huge crisis in manpower. I think that's true across industries, but in forestry, right, if we're talking about billion-dollar investments in our forests, we need to understand that one of the potential bottlenecks is people. And people are not something the federal government moves around, right? That's just not, we're not communist China. So we'll need to get the state to incentivize this kind of training, whether it's a Shasta Community College or people coming up from other parts of the state. So there's a lot of things that the federal government can solve on forestry, and it basically comes down to reducing regulations and guaranteeing throughputs in basically timber. But there's a lot of things that the state has to resolve, and that's in allowing those plants to get started, because that's not going to happen on federal land, it happens on state land, and in generating a workforce that can work in those facilities. So. Yeah, this will have to be a team effort. And there's a lot of local buy-in as well, but I'm basically out of time.
30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. So, thank you very much.
Okay. Erin, what will you as a candidate do to assure a safer environment for our children, homelessness, and casinos?
Interesting. One at a time.
So, actually, I think it's three questions in one. What will you do to assure a safer environment for our children, period, or question mark? And then second, what are your views or what are your solutions for homelessness, and how do you stand on the casinos? Hopefully I got that.
I'm going to do that in 3 minutes. So I'll first tackle the safer environment for our children. I think that it is really, really important that as a leader that we continue to collaborate and to serve on boards of nonprofits to make sure that there is support financially for those nonprofits, whether that means that we are supporting them financially through the county budget, or whether that means that we are making sure that they're connected to grants throughout the state, those programs that are like the Children's Legacy Center or programs, reading programs from First Five Shasta, or any of these sort of programs, going in and making sure that our children have what it is that they need, and that we're tackling some of those. We have double the ACEs score in Shasta County of the state. And I believe that we also have double of what the national average is. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And so in my opinion, I have continued to do that work. I'm not sure I'll still be able to, but I have been a CASA. I have been part of CASA for nearly a decade. So court-appointed special advocates for youth in dependency court. I currently have a case during campaign season because I think that it's really, really important that there is some person. It honestly only takes one person in a child's life to change the trajectory of their life. And so a CASA is that specific person who advocates for that child inside and outside of the courtroom, who's a volunteer, is not paid. And I think that making sure that we are advocating for our abused and neglected children is something in which that I will continue to care about. I mentioned the reading because I also think that literacy is really important and have been a supporter of the library, and we love we do it with our Dutch Bros, that we have done book fundraisers, and we also go in and read to kindergarten classes, and I think that that's maybe one of my just favorite things to do, is to teach children the joy of learning, and I think that that's really important. I also am the current treasurer for the Children's Legacy Center. Children's Legacy Center is a group that was formed out of the law enforcement and county agencies that touch youth who are abused or neglected. Prior to the Children's Legacy Center, any child who had been through severe sexual assault would be interviewed on average 11 different times in Shasta County. With the formation of the Children's Legacy Center, the goal is to lessen the after the fact impacts and trauma on those children, so that they can, with a goal of a higher prosecution rate, so we can put more criminals away, because we do a better job with a collaboration of all of that law enforcement, as well as just lessen what those impacts are. So the goal is for children to only be interviewed one time, so that we can hopefully, that's one of those things that will help reduce the ACEs scores within Shasta County. Oh gosh, I have three.
That was 3 minutes on one question, so.
I care. I'm
I'll
sorry.
come back. I'll come back.
Okay,
I'll
we'll
come
keep.
back. There were good questions, but we'll come back and ask
Should
those.
Erin get another 3 minutes for each part?
He's going to ask me that. He's going to come back to some of those.
Max, what is the first thing you'll do when elected for District 1?
The big thing is introduce reforms to NEPA, right? That's the National Environmental Policy Act. That ties into forestry to reduce basically the regulatory red tape that has destroyed our forest management industry, right? So I think that's the biggest problem facing CD1. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but my brother lost his house to fire. A lot of people have lost their houses to fire in CD1, and it's only going to get worse, right? Climate change is real. We're going to have more high-intensity blazes. This isn't something that we can solve by just throwing money at, like more tankers or something. Yes, we do need more firefighters. We need more, equipment to fight fires. But fundamentally, this is a management issue, and the management issue is fundamentally a misregulation issue, right? There was a very idealistic idea. We were going to save the northern spotted owl. We were going to protect our forests, and it hasn't worked, right? We can look at the outcome, right? The outcome has been losing 35% of our forests to fire. And not just, light fire that burns out the undergrowth. This is high intensity fire, right? So we need to step back and reassess. And this is something that the government does very poorly. Generally, whenever there's a problem with a law, the government passes another law, kind of build on top of it, and you get this tangle, this accoutrement of just regulatory morass. And we need to start looking at what regulations are not working and how do we cut them, right? And it's not like I'm proposing that we just throw out every environmental law, but we can see that it's not working on forestry. And so a substantive reform to NEPA and reducing the regulatory burden of timber, of the timber industry is called for, and that would be my push there. So I know that sounds really weird that you're getting a Democrat saying my first order of business is reducing regulation, but the point is we need a government, and I'm a believer in government, right? I don't just want to tear it all down. But we need government that works, and we need government that delivers. And part of that means is that the government needs to be self-conscious enough to know when it's making a mistake and to readjust, right? So I'm not saying we hop out of the boat of government. I'm just saying we turn the wheel a bit, right? So it's probably a terrible analogy, and I'll sit down, but that's kind of the the idea, right, is that we can make some substantive changes and make it easier for private industry to solve the problems that we want them to solve, because that is what has always made America work best, is when the government sets some rules and serves as the umpire, and then private sector plays the game. So that's what I would push for in Congress, is reducing regulation on timber.
Okay, let's finish up the last question, Erin. And whoever wrote this, if I get it wrong, speak up. Homelessness. What are your views, and most important, how do we solve the homeless situation in Shasta County? And the second one is, what are your views on the relocation of the casino? And again,
That sounds
if I
great.
got this wrong, whoever wrote it can correct me. But I think that's the question.
Perfect. I will attempt to do this quickly. Maybe I'll attempt to spend a minute and a half on each of those. And to do that, I will probably run through, I have a list of 18 different projects that the city has worked on. But in terms of what I would do, well, first off, any candidate who tells you that they alone can solve homelessness is blowing smoke. This is not only a county issue, this is a state issue, and we do have some, I'll call it West Coast issue, but as well as a national issue, because I think that housing in general and mental health and a handful of those different things all play into that. What I think can be done here is education. I think that we need to do a better education and communication process with the community. The second thing that I think that we need to do is that historically the county has sort of taken a back seat. The cities have been at the forefront of solving some of those problems, but the reality is that the county is the big brother who's supposed to be out front, and they are often the financial.
That's a minute and a half.
That's a minute and a half. They're often the financial. I also think that we need to focus on the continuum of care. I would like to do a handful of things at the county level that we have done at the city level. We have things like resource cards that we pass out, that RPD passes out when they come in contact with somebody who is looking for where is it that they can get services, what sort of services, where can we plug them in. I would like to expand the CIRT team, the Crisis Intervention Response Team. That's supposed to be a collaboration between Health and Human Services and RPD, APD, and the sheriff. So if we could get them all the staffing that they need, I would like to get us more clinicians and mental health providers and case managers, because homelessness really is this individualized, each situation is dynamic and different, and so we need more case managers to help us manage that problem. Then we have the opportunity to make life uncomfortable for those folks who aren't somebody who actually needs help. There's somebody who would like to live off the system, or there's somebody who would like to abuse the system. But in those sort of things, implementing things like CIRT, we have and case managers, we have the opportunity to get every single person or their family member the resources that they want. Okay, I'm going to attempt to discuss the casino.
Cheryl, so that's the first question. So I did it again. Asked you two questions. So we'll start over on the casino issue.
You want me to sit down and then, or sort of?
No, yes, stand up and finish it. Now, what about the casinos?
In regards to the casino, so roughly about 2 years ago, the city council wrote a letter to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and to the Department of Interior saying that we oppose the project in a 5-0 unanimous vote. So that was Michael DeQuisto, Julie Winter, Kristen Schrader, Adam McIlvain, and myself. We're all members of the council when that happened. Councilmember DeQuisto and I both wrote a letter, and then we jointly wrote a letter, and then the council approved that letter and sent it off. One of the things, or a couple of the things that we are most concerned about prior to giving an endorsement on that project are things like an appropriate environmental impact study. That land is in a 100-year flood zone, or 100-year flood plain, which is a concern for me because as we've been discussing with water, the Sacramento River is one of the largest sources of water for majority of California. It's also very important for us and for our water. So I want to make sure that the environmental things are done perfectly and that the plan is laid out perfectly prior to that. I also think that it's really important. There are some severe not discrepancies, but failure to correctly evaluate the traffic in the traffic impact study. The current traffic impact study does not include the Costco development. It does not include the Churn Creek shopping development, and it does not include what the impacts would be on Caltrans. So when Rolling Hills hosts, you've probably seen they have their outdoor space. If they host a event of any kind, they have from that exit all the way back. It's roughly a quarter mile, a half mile. We do not have that between where the property would be. So there needs to be a plan in place. What would that traffic look like? We need to have a traffic impact study done that evaluates that. The third thing that needs to be done is that we need to know how we're going to tackle the public safety issue that naturally comes when you have an interstate that goes from Mexico to Canada. We know the things that get trafficked up and down I-5, but you will also naturally have the person who's driving from Sacramento to Oregon and would like to pull off and gamble for a little while and go back on. That means that there are people from out of our county who will be coming off of the interstate, and we need to know that we can handle that if that person particularly causes issues. We know, and I know from meeting with each of the public safety entities, police and sheriff's department, that there are issues that they have to deal with at the casino. That's not necessarily the casino's fault, but there are naturally in a gambling sort of environment, there are issues in which that happen, and we need to know that we have the public safety infrastructure, like jail beds, to be able to hold somebody and to be able to tackle that problem. I also think that we need to tackle the utilities and where does the wastewater and other electrical issues come from for that project.
Thank you. Okay, two important issues. Max, how long do you see yourself as a representative?
0 to 2 years. Guys, this is a Republican area, right? Like, it's already a long shot. I don't want to give you guys like, oh yeah, I'm going in. Listen, I want to hear you because obviously if I do win, I want to know your concerns, right? But this is a tough district to win, right? I'm running because I think it's important that politicians are held to account, right? I think it's insulting that my opponent won't even debate me. I think it's crazy that people are going to vote for some guy who just doesn't even participate in the democratic process instead of getting out and defending his record to voters. And so that's why I'm running, right? I joined the army in the middle of Iraq. I don't do things because I think we're going to be necessarily victorious or because I think it's going to be easy. So 2 years, though, I'd love to represent you for 2 years. I think our country would be better off if we had more moderates and more veterans who served in Washington for a short amount of time and then went in with some limited set of objectives that they wanted to accomplish rather than an idea that they wanted to make it a career. Because I'm going to be honest with you, this is a moderate Republican district, right? It's 40% Republican, 30% Dem, 30% Independent, right? It's not deep red, but it's red. You're going to have a Republican rep the majority of your life, right? And I'm sorry or congratulations, depending on how you feel about that. But if you're Republican, you can do a lot better than Doug LaMalfa. And if you're a Democrat, you can do a lot better than Doug LaMalfa, right? We have a deep bench of Republican politicians in this corner of the state, right? We've got a guy running for governor who would probably make a far better congressman than Doug and will probably lose his governor election, just like I will probably lose CD1 because it's even harder to win statewide as a Republican in California than it is to win district-wide as a Democrat in CD1. So don't think for a second that I'm going to turn the North State blue. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry, Democratic table. But hopefully we can get politicians who for the next 10 years will be like, oh, shoot, I really do need to go to debates. Oh, I probably shouldn't antagonize 40% of my voters just because they belong to the Democratic Party and I don't even want to pretend that they exist, right? I think that we can ask for a moderate Republican representative in a moderate Republican district who listens to Democrats and Republicans and everyone from the Green Party to the Red, White, and Blueprint and tries to represent them in DC. And that's why I'm running, right? So I hope I can get a lot done in 2 years, or at least what I want to get done on forestry and water. But at the very least, I hope that at the end of those 2 years, you guys, well, I know that statistically it's overwhelmingly likely that you will get a better representative than Doug LaMalfa in 2024, even if you're a Republican, if you vote for me in 2022. So that's kind of like the, this isn't going to be, you're not looking at the start of a political dynasty. Like, sorry.
Okay, same question for you, Erin. How long do you plan to be a supervisor?
Oh man, I am really only taking this 4 years is what that term looks like. I will be very honest that I didn't actually think that I would run for a city council position when I agreed to run for city council. And up until about November of 2021, I had been planning where it was that I was going to vacation with my children after being done on city council in December. I have probably been plotting the amount of time that I would get back with my family. Oh, wow, that hit me. For a solid 3 years. I think I had a member of the Anderson City Council say to me that oftentimes people make comments to him about being a career politician because he's ran a second time. And he corrected that person and he said, this is a sacrifice. This is a sacrifice from my time, from my family, from my work, from all of those things because I care about my community. And so I'll be honest, if you had asked me a year and a half ago, did I plan on running for a board of supervisors position? I absolutely did not. But I deeply care about our community and I know that I can help and I know that I have been able to make progress on big topics in relationship to the city council. And I know that I can bring that sort of excellent and skill set to leave my ego at the door and to tackle these problems and to come in low because my goal is to serve my community in the best way possible. So in all honesty, I'm looking at what goes on in the next 27 to 28 days because I care and I would love to serve my community for the next 4 years. It is a big job and it is a lot that I am stepping away from my other duties to do because I deeply care about this community.
Okay. Next will be Max. And I'm going to read, this is in cursive, so it's the only one in cursive, so I hope I do justice here. Hopefully you have seen what the results of the water being cut off throughout the ACID district this year. Would you advocate for federal intervention to allow water to the district despite contract restraints with the Bureau of Reclamation? I think that's for, is this yours? I think that's for Max. So if it's not,
Could probably
whoever
be
wrote
for
this,
either
stand
of
up
us,
and
but-
let me know.
Great. So Bureau of Reclamation kind of is the federal entity that manages water at Shasta. And basically what's happening in water is that we are prioritizing environmental water over agricultural and urban water use, right? So ACID faced a massive cut. Why? Because we managed water poorly over the winter, right? So November and December, we were letting out a high volume of water out of Shasta because we have an antiquated federal guidelines on water levels in Shasta that haven't taken into account climate change and that don't take into account basically future ag and urban needs. So if the government, as is the case, basically there's a law that says you need to release, I think it's 40% of all rainfall that occurs over a 2-month period, right? So you can average it out, so the dam kind of reduces it, but it can't store more than 60% of the water that falls, even when Shasta was at barely above minimum levels. This is a disaster, right? And the idea is that, oh, we want to minimize the impact on the environment. Well, we live in a state with 40 million people. We're going to impact the environment, all right? We have this idea of, oh, we'll treat the North State, and this is, I don't mean to be, too many people in California and at the federal government want to treat the northern part of California like it's a national park or national forest, and it's not. People live here, we have jobs here, and that means that we're going to affect the environment in which we live. And oftentimes, that's going to hurt the environment. And that means that we need to have rules to make sure that we don't hurt the environment too much. But when we waste water, we need to understand that there is an environmental and a social, and yes, an environmental cost to that. Because when ACID cut water flow to zero, because 19% wasn't enough for the canal, we are seeing serious groundwater issues all through the ACID, basically, cantonment area, right? And that's been terrible, right? I know Jane, my campaign manager, likes to throw her in a bus. She goes out and she takes wildlife photography at like 5 a.m. every morning. It's nuts. But, these small lakes are drying up. We've gone out and seen these canals. Like, this is an environmental disaster. No one would have allowed ACID to go to 0% under any environmental regime that was thought through, hey, if you cut your flow to zero, will this be an environmental problem? No, obviously it would, right? So we wouldn't allow you. And instead we kind of boxed ourselves in. So my push there, the federal government needs to reassess how it balances water needs. And frankly, the environment comes last, right? I don't want the Sacramento River to dry up, right? That's not the goal. But the goal is that we need to prioritize our economy, we need to prioritize our people, and we need to prioritize our section of the state. And, not to sound flippant, but fish don't vote, okay? And so you need to think about the policies that affect people that vote, because we live in a republic and a democracy, and those are the people that we have to represent as politicians.
Okay, next is Erin. Tell us why you felt the land deal with SPI was appropriate. That's Sierra Pacific Industries.
So I believe that this question is referring to the council in 2020, I believe, sold a parcel of land that was surplus property to an entity called Shasta Land Holdings. Shasta Land Holdings often is tied to Sierra Pacific because there are members of Sierra Pacific that are also members of Shasta Land Holdings. That deal was done because the city council had voted 5-0 to not support the development of the casino on that property. That parcel was sold for twice over what it was evaluated for. And to the best of our knowledge, when we made that vote, we were on, maybe I should say, to the best of our knowledge, we were following all of the processes that were set in place. It's frequently said online that the city council knowingly broke the law and had an illegal land sale. That's just not fact. The fact is that that's not even actually what the lawsuit was over in regards to the tribe. The lawsuit was over the process that was used. So the state of California passed Surplus Land Act. However, the state of California took 15 months to release what those regulations are. So you will notice that when we discussed the riverfront property and the sale of the riverfront, we held a series, I think 6 or 7 different workshops because the Surplus Land Act had just come to us 2 months before that. When we made the decision to sell that property, did we know that there needed to be roughly 7 days in between when we decided to sell and when we decided to vote on a resolution? No, we did not. However, we did know that in hindsight, which is why you've seen me say mistakes were made in the process. Do I regret the decision that we made? I regret that I didn't know that there were processes that were supposed to be followed at the state level. However, I don't regret selling that piece of property because it supported a 5-0 vote and a direction that the council was heading prior to that. And I would have done that no matter who the person was who had made the offer. It's frequently said online that that was made because SPI or because Red Emerson made a contribution to my campaign. And if you look over my 460 forms, you will see that they are in fact not the only person who has made me a couple $1,000 donation. And in all honesty, it's insulting that somebody would think that that would be the goal. That would be the goal. I've received lots of support from lots of people, and they just happen to be somebody who supports the decisions in which that I have made. And I think that that probably speaks for itself. If there's something in regards to that also that somebody would like to know, I am more than willing to not last city council meeting, but the city council meeting before, there was, I believe that it was September 20th, there was an entire presentation from the city attorney, as well as a debrief staff report on the entire thing, as well as a live video that you can see how every member of the city council and why they voted for that.
Max, I believe much of the forest land in Shasta County is federally owned. Is there any potential for California to put pressure on the federal government to clean up their forests?
Well, yeah, you can send me to Congress. Right, so you are completely correct in that it is federally owned. This isn't an issue where we have to have California pressure the feds. This is an issue where the federal Congress and the executive branch agencies, either BLM or U.S. Forest Service, step up, right? So Congress needs to hold those agencies to account. You do that either by changing their budget, by calling them in for hearings, or by embarrassing them by going out to a forest and mocking them, right? So all of these are kind of influence points. And then, you know, it can also influence through the executive branch directly by, say, lobbying President Biden, right? Which is easier to do as a Democrat over the next 2 years, which is all I'm asking for, than as a Republican. So, you know, this is something that needs to be fixed. And yes, Congress needs to do a better job of holding the Forest Service and BLM to account. But it's not so much that California is doing it. The state government in California has made a lot of advances on fire. Cal Fire spent a lot more money. Most state land is actually privately owned, right? It belongs to California, that it's subject to California law, but it's owned by entities like SPI, right? Who have a really good economic incentive to manage their forests properly. There are risks, right? So SPI hates being neighbors of the Forest Service, either in the checkerboard pattern or not, because Forest Service land is terribly maintained. And no matter how well you maintain or SPI maintains their forests, you know, if you've got a canopy blaze coming in on a 25-mile-per-hour wind, that SPI tree is burning, right? And that's a huge cost for SPI, and it's also a danger for everyone who lives, you know, near, you know, that private sector forest, SPI, California land, or the federal forest. I seem to have a little bit of time, so I'm just going to change subjects and talk about the casino, because obviously that's important in Redding. You know, one, I'll preface this by noting that I didn't get any money from Red or from SPI, you know, despite all my forestry talk. That sounds pretty reasonable, I'm pretty sure. Or to the Democrats, like, really right wing. But listen, the problem with Indian casinos is that we have this idea of generational guilt, and we shouldn't, all right? We are Americans. The tribes are a sovereign state, and they are subject to their own rules, but we should not be making exceptions for them, all right? And the Redding City Council voted 5-0 to do something with Redding land. And that's how democracies work, right? You make a vote and you move on. And you don't let someone challenge it just because they've got this special race card to play or special tribe card to play. And I know that sounds weird coming from a Democrat, right? And that generally we are pro-tribe. But I really firmly believe that the path forward in America is that we are, you know, race blind, and we acknowledge that there have been terrible historical mistakes, especially with tribes, but that we're not going to move forward by making a special set of rules for one group of people. That's not the answer, and it's not what I would support in Congress. As opposed to, I'm going to take 10 extra seconds, you know, my opponent, Doug LaMalfa, his biggest donors are Indian tribes. He loves this. He loves this idea of like, oh yeah, special rules for you as long as you give me money. I think that's hypocritical. I think that's un-American. And I think that I would support local governments who are trying to do the right thing for their communities. And I would support them as a duly elected legislature rather than relying on this idea of, hey, here's this generational guilt that, you know, is no longer applicable.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks.
To Erin, will you support the jail complex known as the Wheel? And you might want to explain what the Wheel is.
Well, it goes through lots of different iterations. So I believe that I saw or heard Supervisor Committee call it a correctional and rehabilitation campus most recently. So we'll talk about it as a campus. It often is called, or previously was called Wagon Wheel, and so sometimes it's referred to as that. But it is an integration of health and human services and jail services. So there are lots of issues. This also plays into homelessness. We have mental health issues. We have what they call a dual diagnosis problem. So somebody has a mental health issue because of a drug problem. They have a drug problem because of their mental health issue and self-medicating. Those folks often are committing petty theft. And it is very difficult as the state of California, maybe I'll go back to say that Prop 4757 and AB 109, those are things that drastically changed what the face of California looks like. And it looks like that up and down California. When we change what it is, and when we change and say that rape of an unconscious victim is now a misdemeanor, that changes who it is and what it is. It changes the amount of teeth that our law enforcement can have. And so we have to know that we're doing business in California. And the state of California will not give grant money for things that don't include, or mostly will not give grant money, and things that do not include rehabilitation. Also, we have seen over generations that put somebody in, turn the key, and throw it away does not work. We know that that doesn't work. We know that there are measurable outcomes and programs that are evidence-based, and there are rehabilitation programs that can work. And so I do support the wagon wheel approach and a campus outside of town. There is a property that has been identified off of Airport/Old Oregon Trail Road that is owned by the county. They have roughly about 3 or 4 different properties around them that they could bring into one, and we could be thinking about the future, about what direction it's going, what direction we are going to be and where are we going to be in 30 years, so that we're not in a situation where we have to close down a level of the jail because we have a safety concern and a morale concern and an exhaustion concern. It is often said, and I get asked by folks like, why would you take state money, or how would you pay for that? Last year the county put roughly $14 million aside for that project. I believe that that's the goal again this year. Also, the state has lots of grants for those things that fall under health and human services, that fall under rehabilitation programs. And while we live in the state of California that feels like taxes us up the wazoo, I will gladly take our tax dollars back to fix some of the problems that the legislature in Sacramento has created for us so that we can solve the problems within Shasta County.
Okay, right on time. Okay, Max,
Thanks.
describe what steps you would take to recycle forest fires. I think that should be reduce. It's reduce forest fire.
Yeah, this is a big forester thing. I mean, so not to beat a dead horse, but we need to manage the forest better. We need to do thinning, right? So that's cutting down a lot of trees. You can get a lot of economic value out of that. You can get some jobs out of that, both on the cut side, on the transport side, and on the mill side. Some of that thinning can be used for either you're actually making lumber projects or you're generating power, right? So this idea of cogen or dedicated generation plants. I just talked to the EDC in Redding today about using basically forest products to make jet fuel. So that's something that SpaceX was looking at doing in Shasta County and decided not to because they couldn't guarantee a feedstock on federal land. So that's a huge loss, right? If a big company, a multi-billion-dollar company like SpaceX is exploring making a basically aviation fuel generation or creation facility out of wood byproduct, wood chips, because it's a carbon, you can crack it, you can make a hydrocarbon with enough heat and pressure. We should be exploring that. We should be pressuring the Forest Service to guarantee a flow of lumber, right? Like this all comes down to guaranteeing a flow of lumber into private sector, right? Whether it's a mill, whether it's a generation plant, or whether it's something esoteric like making aviation fuel with SpaceX billions, wild. So there's that. And then the other thing we need to do is reintroduce prescribed fire when appropriate, right? So prescribed fire is how you treat kind of non-economical brush at scale. You need to have a certain amount of training. You definitely need to have a lot of equipment on standby. And you need to do it in a window of opportunity that are high humidity and low wind, or recently after a rainfall, where you're not going to have an escape, right? Prescribed fires are very dangerous. You guys might not remember, but we had 2 massive fires in New Mexico earlier this year, state record-setting blazes. Both of them were prescribed fires that got out of control, right? So there's a time and a place for prescribed fire, and it needs to come after thinning. And then the third thing, because I just haven't talked about this much, this is about hiring and managing firefighters better. So, I'm the guy in an army, I kind of see every problem as a nail, right? I'm the guy with a hammer, I see every problem as a nail. We need to transition out of having, seasonal hourly workers on our firefighting workforce, right? Like, you can get someone to do a really miserable, physically demanding, and dangerous job if you pay them, a little bit and guarantee good benefits and give them a solid path to early retirement, right? The Army does it all the time, all right? So you pay someone a good salary, you give them really good benefits, and then you let them retire after 20 or 25 years, right? Age 40 or age 45 for a firefighter that starts at age 20. So this is a better way to manage our firefighting workforce instead of saying, hey, you might make $40,000 this summer, or you might make $90,000, just depending on how many fires there are. And it's this really perverse incentive, not to throw firefighters under the bus, but there are cases of firefighters starting fires because they need the hours, right? And more importantly, if you're hiring people seasonally, like, you will generally lose high quality people because they're going to find a job that can give them year-round employment, right? We need to be generating a career path for people so that they stay in firefighting, build up expertise, and then leave at age 40 or 45 when they're no longer physically capable of doing it and they go into some other public sector job.
Thank you. I've got a question.
Yeah.
Why? There's been a lot of questions about fire in our forests, and there should be because we live right there. Why doesn't the federal government hire the private sector who manages their forests much better than the federal government? Why don't they just hire them?
Yeah, that's kind of the idea of guaranteeing this throughput, right? The federal government doesn't cut the trees. The federal government would own the land, and it would approve a timber management plan, and then it would say, hey, private company, you want to cut down 80% of the trees in this area, of this size range, right? And then a private company goes in, cuts it, a private sector truck moves it out, and then a private sector mill processes it. So the federal government is really just continues to own the land because it does belong to the American people, and then it kind of manages that oversight process. But you're right, all of the actual work, like most things in America, is done by the private sector.
Yeah, but they do it better. In some cases, they do it much better than government.
Lots of cases.
Lots of cases, okay. For Erin, how do you see your time on the city council as assisting in the future collaboration between the county and the city?
Prior to COVID, when I was the vice mayor of Redding, we met on a regular basis because the interests of each individual city, so I should say, we met on a regular basis with the chair and vice chair of the Board of Supervisors. Those conversations routinely happened, and there have been conversations that have started specifically at the moment surrounding homelessness and public safety that have happened from the city managers of Anderson, Redding, Shasta Lake to loop in and to get the county to have more of a buy-in. So I have established those sort of relationships before. I have those sort of relationships up and down the state to give us like insight. Hey, what's working here? What little thing can we glean? I've had those sort of working relationships on a continual basis. I have also learned a handful of things of what works and what hasn't worked at the city of Redding. We have hired more lateral officers in the last 7 months than we have in roughly 3 years at the city of Redding because we changed how it is that we were hiring. And we did it because we increased the incentive, but we also got a better bang for our buck. It was a financial decision because when we hire laterals—
What are laterals?
Sorry, good question. A lateral officer is somebody who has worked as a police officer in some other, or for a law enforcement agency in some other capacity somewhere else. So maybe somebody from Chico decides, or maybe somebody from Alameda has worked there and they're tired of working in that area and they want to raise their family here in the North State, and they see that we have a $40,000 hiring bonus and they move here. The city of Redding saves $10,000 than when we hire a recruit. So a recruit is somebody who hasn't been through training, who hasn't been through field training once they've been out of out of police officer training.
Post.
Thank you. Once they've done that, because what happens is that 60% of recruits fail. So essentially, 50%, if we pick 10, 5 of them on average don't make it out of that training into the city. So I would say the things in which that I have learned at the city, I would like to take to the county so that we can start looking at the areas, because they're very similar areas. Their homelessness, their mental health, their jail space. That's a problem for the city also, because we want the county to have some more jail space. They are public safety. Those are issues at the county and at the city level. And I have been able to see how we can do it more efficiently at the city level, and now we need to do that at the county level. The county needs to be more of a leader.
Okay. Max, what would you do to improve the lives of homeless veterans?
Yeah, so obviously I care a lot about veterans. I'm in the VA. I actually just went to the VA today up in Redding. Nice new facility. The big thing that we need to do for homeless veterans is to acknowledge that there's a problem and to recognize that the solution can be federal, right? And that means that the federal government take a far bigger role for homeless veterans than it can for, a general homeless individual, right? Because there's no nexus there. There's no system that we can use. The VA should be running far more inpatient housing for individuals that need to transition out of homelessness, right? If there's a homeless veteran on the street, I don't want him to end up in a pallet shelter with everyone else. I want him to end up in a dedicated VA facility where he can receive that wraparound care through the VA that he's entitled to. And the second thing is that the VA needs to focus a lot more on mental health. And that means mental health institutions, asylums, but that's not the current name for them, just FYI, that will treat homeless veterans, but also veterans that aren't homeless. And oftentimes, this will not be voluntary, right? There's the big debate in homeless care. Do you make this optional? Do you provide access to the services and just hope that a homeless person accepts them? Or do you say you are mentally incompetent in a legal sense, and we are going to treat you because you are an American and you are broken? And I am a fan of option 2, right? If someone is on the streets, they have made a series of poor personal decisions, or they have a mental health problem, or they have a drug problem. And 2 of those we can treat, and 1 of those we can't, but we can absolutely remove that public cost, right? Someone who is homeless in a community is imposing a societal cost on other people. I am not going to let private industries dump human effluent into rivers. And I'm not going to let homeless people do it either. And I'm absolutely going to use the full power of the federal government, when appropriate, such as in the case of veterans, to make sure that that does not happen. So this is a small part of the homeless burden, but obviously something that a lot of people care a lot about, that the federal government can solve for cities and counties and let them focus on homeless populations that they will have to resolve.
Erin, would you debate Kevin, ... please, exclamation mark. Kevin Cry is your
Mr.
opponent.
Cry and I have debated about 5 different times at this point in time. The chamber hosted a debate. The League of Women Voters have hosted 2 different debates. We debated the other day on the radio. We have done this a bunch of times.
Okay, thank you. Max, describe your vision for improving our water storage.
So basically it's building sites. That project is almost done, but my God, it's been almost done for a long time. Fun story, my grandpa, age 92, drilled under what is now, or will be hopefully, Sites Reservoir in 1961 to check to see if there was oil there. There's not. But yeah, so rest assured, right? California is a big oil producer, by the way. My grandpa worked his whole career for the State Geologic Survey, basically looking for oil. So there's a lot that we can do. That's the fracking answer, sorry. But yeah, so sites is an easy yes. We're at the stage, it's minimal environmental cost. Yes, it's kind of costly. For those that don't know, sites would be on the border of Glenn and Colusa County, west of I-5, and it's basically a small valley that you would kind of dam one end of and then pump water into. And then you'd use that water when you can. And it kind of acts as supplemental storage to Shasta. Sites itself would be very shallow, and so you'd have to use that water first, otherwise you'd lose a lot more of it to evaporative loss. But you could kind of use Sites water in a wet year, and then use that for the next 1 or 2 years, and therefore you have to release less water out of Shasta, and the water you do release out of Shasta can stay for farther northern usage, like ACID. The other big project that's on the table in the North State is raising Shasta Dam. I think it's something that absolutely has to be studied. It's something that the state has killed. The state basically designated the Wild and Scenic River, the McCloud River, as wild and scenic. Part of federal dam policy, not to get boring, but we need state level buy-in. We need local water districts to buy in. Well, because California has designated this river as wild and scenic, local water agencies can't buy in. I would propose an exemption to the Bureau, so the Bureau would just own that water and it could sell it at market rate prices, because the Wild and Scenic River exemption doesn't apply to the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. But we're absolutely going to need more water storage. So with climate change, we will get warming. And with warming, we'll have more rain and less snow. Snow is really easy to manage, right? If you get 6 feet of snow, great. You know, like some communities are going to be living on beans for a little while, right? But if you get a foot of water, like you're flooding in the Sacramento Valley, all right? Sacramento is the second most likely city to flood after New Orleans. I think we all remember, 17 years ago, Katrina. So that's why this whole water system was built in California. With climate change, we're going to need to build higher dams, and probably higher levees. There are other dams that we can look at. They're mostly smaller. Out of district, though, nearby is Auburn, right? So Auburn and Thomas dams were built as part of a 2-dam complex. The Auburn site is along a fault, which is why it was abandoned, but you can move farther up the American River. But basically, we need to be looking as a federal government and as a state as to where we can build more water storage in California, because that will both increase our economic resilience, but also increase our resilience in the face of flooding, which is a reality of climate change.
Yeah. Last question. Do you see value in scientific research in making decisions regarding timber and water in the North State?
Yeah, so, I know that I look like a young, fit guy, and I was in the infantry, but I was on the math team in high school. Like, that was my sport. So I'm really kind of a nerd, geek guy at heart. I wrote a lot of PhD studies on forestry, right? Like, yes, there are wackadoodle forestry PhDs like Chad Hansen who are like, you should never cut down a tree. Well, they're anti-vax doctors, guys. Like an upper division PhD doesn't necessarily mean you're always right. But you need to read a lot of scientific articles to inform your decisions. You need to take a step back and you try to read as many as you can, and then you make a policy kind of decision in your mind. And then if I'm elected, I'm going to make policy proposals as law. So yes, I think science is very important. It's a key part of the policy-making process. You can't just wing this kind of stuff, guys, all right? Like, we are one of the biggest country, we're the most important country in the world, we're the biggest economy in the world. California is the 5th largest economy in the world by itself. When we make decisions, we need to be cognizant that, we have to use as much evidence as we can, and then we need to be humble enough to recognize that sometimes the decisions that we've made in the past have been wrong, right? So I talked about NEPA reform. Sometimes you say, well, a lot of people studied it and it was wrong. We're going to go back, we're going to look at the new science, and we're going to make a better decision going forward. So yes, scientifically informed decision making, absolutely what I want to do. So thanks.
Okay. We wanted to end this at a reasonable time before people started getting bored, frankly, and leaving. So I'd like to thank all of you for attending, especially Erin and Max. I'm sure your families would love to see you, but thanks for coming out. And I also like to thank Sierra Nevada. I like Sierra Nevada too, but Sierra Forward for hosting this and coming up with this idea. Such a nice way to get to know the candidates. And on that note, if you have questions and want to talk to them, they're available for at least a few minutes after this. Thanks, everybody.
Can we just say?
Oh, you're closing. I'm sorry. So I've done my closing. Now you do yours.
I mostly just wanted to say thank you. You can stand because I'm not going to talk for an extended period of time. I really wanted to say thank you. I really enjoy this format. I love answering questions. I forgot that there was another debate. We did do Republican Central Committee. I knew that there were 5, so we have done that 5 different times, debates. I really care about our community, and I understand that people say that when they're running for unelected position, but that is something that I just deeply care about. And I know that Shasta County has its fair share of problems, but I truly believe that we can make great strides in finding solutions and solving some of those problems for our entire community. And I want to thank you for spending your evening with us. It really means a lot to me that you came out and that you asked questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you very much for coming. My pitch to you is that I'm a moderate, I'm a veteran, I've thought through a lot of issues that are important in the North State, and I want to get your vote, right? I know that most of you have already received your ballot. I know you're voting because you come out to these events. No one does this for fun. So go home tonight and think to yourself, right? Like, either you're a Democrat who's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to vote for this guy that wants to cut down trees, or you're a moderate, who's like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for in the North State, or you're a Republican and who just thinks to yourself, well, you know what, he showed up, and he's new, and he's got some energy, and he's willing to participate in the democratic process. So that's my pitch, right? I'd love to answer questions. I'd love to represent you in DC for a very short but hopefully productive period of time. And I think that we can do better than Doug LaMalfa. My opponent has refused to debate me, I think for a reason. And I think that at the very least, hey, Erin's done 5 debates. You should probably be asking for 1 out of your representative. So thank you very much for your time. Go back, enjoy your Sierra Nevada, product of Chico. So you're helping out the CD1 economy there. But thank you very much. I'll stick around, and I hope everyone has a great night. Thanks.